Narayana namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam mudirayet. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. Om namo bhagavate vasudevaya. So we worship the Panchatattva with Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Now, what is very interesting is that Sri Advaita Acharya is an incarnation of Sri Mahavishnu. He is an incarnation of Karanodaka Shai Vishnu. He is the first Purusha. And from him, the expansion of Garbhodaka Shai Vishnu, who lies in the Garbhodaka ocean, who is practically the maintainer of every universe. There's a specific incarnation of the Lord, Garbhodaka Shai Vishnu, who lies in the who lies in the Garbhodaka ocean within the universe, and he practically is the maintainer of the universe and of those who administrate the universe as well. So he's the super soul of the personalities who administrate, so that he can connect to the different personalities who are the administrators and then manage the universe and support the universe as it requires. And then there is a Vaikuntha planet, or rather a portion of each universe, which is also called the Shirodaka ocean, Shira, which is milk, and then an incarnation of Vishnu. He practically lies on the Shirodaka ocean. He is basically the Shirodaka Shai Vishnu. He expands as the Paramatma and sits in the entity's hearts, each and every entity, practically every one of us. And then he practically guides us in our activity. He gives us intelligence. So when we use the word intelligence, it is not so much intelligence as in being good in mathematics or being proficient in any one subject or another. Intelligence, the quality of intelligence, the Shakti has a lot of reference to be able to practically be able to receive realizations in the heart. So when we use the word intelligence in the context of Vedic knowledge, in the context of Shastra, or in the context of what is traditionally learnt, we are referring to the Shakti, which is practically being able to listen to the super soul. Yeah. So one who is able to have purity has the ability to listen to the super soul. In other words, if they are in the mode of goodness, the likelihood of them being able to listen to the super soul is very high. If they are in the mode of ignorance, they're going to be very much attuned to what the body and the senses want, and they can't really understand the direction of the Lord. So the Lord basically grants them intelligence to manage the body. So the point being that these are expansions of Lord Narayana, and Lord Narayana is Krishna in the Vaikuntha planets. So Krishna in Vraja is where the Aishwarya of Vraja, which is the opulence of Vraja, which is all the Kalpavriksha trees, the trees that can grant all kinds of boons for the service of the Lord and for the pleasure of the Lord. And then you have the Surabhi cows, which practically every cow in Goloka is a Surabhi cow. So there's great opulence. They can practically grant anything they want. They can create universes. Now, that opulence is covered over in Vraja by the sweetness of the pastimes of Krishna, where the Vrajavasis do not recognize him, fortunately, as the Supreme Lord, but then love him unconditionally. In the Vaikuntha planets, this sweetness is covered over by the opulence, and he is worshipped as Narayana. He is worshipped as the origin of all the Purusha avatars. He is worshipped as the king of all the Vaikuntha planets. So the opulence and Aishwarya of Lord Narayana is covered over in Vraja. So the sweetness of Vraja is so powerful, it can cover over the opulence of Lord Narayana and the Aishwarya of Lord Narayana. And even he forgets that he is basically the supreme. And he engages in pastimes as if, there is no consequence. He basically engages in pastimes as a cowherd boy, as a child, and he engages and interacts with his devotees with such intimacy that he would not allow any kind of opulence or any kind of knowledge which is basically gyan, to interfere. So the gyan part, as we call it, knowledge is gyan, that knowledge which practically interferes with service is also obfuscated, it is blocked in Vraja, where they don't even recognize him as the Supreme Lord, because that interferes with their ability to give and receive love. Now, why is this being said, and why did I start with the Panchatattva prayers? Because this is a class for Srimad Bhagavatam, and what is the context? Sri Advaita Acharya Prabhu, who is Mahavishnu, who basically is the origin of the Purusha avatars, he could not start the mission of Mahaprabhu on his own. Mahavishnu could not start Gaur Leela. He couldn't. He could not start the Yuga Dharma of chanting of Harinam, or he felt inadequate because all the rasas of Vraja are not contained within the heart of Sri Mahavishnu. Even Lord Narayana, who is Mahavishnu, even he desires to understand Vraja, he desires to experience Vraja and all its opulence, the opulence of sweetness, which is. And as a consequence, he felt inadequate. And what did he do? He practically worshipped Krishna in the Narasimha Rupa. He worshipped Lord Narasimhadev. It is said that he used to worship Lord Narasimhadev on the banks of the Ganga in Mayapur Dham in Navadvip. And he used to offer very simple worship with the Tulasi and offer Ganga Jal, which is practically one of the best worship that you could ever do for a Shaligram or even Giriraj. And they would be very satisfied. The deities are very satisfied if they receive Tulasis and Ganga Jal. Basically, it's very, Ganga Jal is it's such an amazing thing. Anyway, so the point is that Sri Advaita Acharya Prabhu, even though he was Mahavishnu, he felt inadequate to start the mission. So it's quite a paradox that he is Mahavishnu. He is the origin of all the Purusha avatars. He is the personality who is responsible for this entire process of creation, maintenance, and destruction, which is he's practically responsible for agitating the material universes, agitating primordial matter by his glance. It is Mahavishnu's glance which is personified as Lord Shiva, and his consort, Sri Rama Devi, Lakshmi, she personifies herself as Mother Durga. So this incarnation in the material universe comes from him. Now, this personality found himself inadequate to begin the mission of Harinam, to begin the mission in the recent years of the Yuga Dharma. He wanted Lord Gauranga to descend. He wanted Lord Gauranga to descend because the rasas are not fully available in Vaikuntha. So what an amazing thing. And he felt very responsible. Why would Mahavishnu feel so responsible? Because in Kali Yuga, there is practically no ability of the soul to make it back without mercy. There really isn't any ability. The ability that is provided is also mercy. There was this conversation between Srila Prabhupada and his disciples once, and they recognized the fact that there had to be sukriti, there had to be what you would call as religious observances. You read in the Srimad Bhagavatam that the cowherd boys were great sages and rishis who aspired to serve the Lord, and the samskara and the impression in their heart of being Brajavasis. And then when he departs, he takes them back. Yeah. So this particular Leela that occurs of great sages not having performed penances for them to associate with Krishna and Brajalila, this particular statement was quite bewildering to the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada, who asked him, saying, what is our credit? Where are we? Because we were born in the West and we don't have any samskaras, possibly we don't have any linkage perceptibly. At least you can't see it. And as a consequence, Srila Prabhupada said, I gave you the credits. So Srila Prabhupada had an extraordinary treasure house of credits because he was extraordinarily powerful and a very dear servant of the Lord. And he possessed what we would call as the Shakti of Krishna. He practically had the potency of the Krishna to spread the mission of Gaur Leela around the planet. He was basically the most dear servant of Krishna. As a consequence, he had a treasure house of Sukriti. He had a treasure house of credits. So Srila Prabhupada practically took the credits and then distributed his credits amongst his disciples And as a consequence, his grand disciples are also receiving credits from Srila Prabhupada. Otherwise, there is no qualification whatsoever to be able to engage in sadhana bhakti. And there is no qualification that can ever get us to the level of prema. It is all being given to us as if it's an arrangement. Why am I saying this again? Is that this is so special that Lord Mahavishnu did not feel adequate to bring this particular mission onto the planet by himself. He felt that Srimati Radharani and Krishna had to come together. So he was practically praying that the Lord come. And he was also responsible because he practically impregnated the universe by his glands with all the jivas. And as a consequence, he was responsible for them to be delivered. And as a consequence, he felt the pang of responsibility, saying, I've sent these universes, I've sent all these jivas into the universe. I need to bring them back. There has to be a system. And that system can only be given by Lord Gauranga. Now, we need to understand this because we notice in this chapter a discussion where the Yadus, the personal associates of Krishna, they could not recognize him. They perished. They could not recognize that this was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So you can just imagine that someone is, sporting with him, someone is associating with him, and yet they had no knowledge that Krishna was the Supreme Person. And I'm referring to the Yadus. I'm not referring to the Vrajvasis. I just want to make a distinction. I'm referring to his own clan, the Yadus, who were a part of the Dwaraka and the Mathura, what I would call as entourage. And they were all completely oblivious to his being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whilst he even displayed such extraordinary opulences to them. They could not recognize him. And as a consequence, they practically did not consider, not all of them, but some of them, most of them did not consider him to be the sole object of worship and the sole refuge. They did not. Yeah, they just perished. There was this big fight, and there was destruction, and then they practically perished, most of them. So what is being said here is that the qualification of those personal associates of Krishna who came and who were able to see him and have darshan 5,000 years back, they didn't have the qualifications that is being given to us. So how did we get these qualifications? These qualifications themselves are not ours. They're not ours at all. These are all Prabhupada's mercy. So when you're saying the word mercy, we're literally saying that Srila Prabhupada has this extraordinary storage of blessings and sukriti and the spiritual power that he practically imparts and blesses us whenever we come in touch with him in this parampara. So our good fortune is that we can say that we position ourselves in such a way, and our good fortune is such that we position ourselves in such a way that we came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's blessing. Somehow or the other, we received the sukriti, and some of us got it formalized, and some of us basically, will get it formalized at some point, the connection. So the connection is already made because it is in the heart. Now, it's very important for us to realize that this extraordinary presence of the Lord is not recognized. This is the reason why we say that, if you don't recognize him, if you don't engage in personal seva, then you fall down, even if you go to the spiritual sky. What does it mean? It means that when the Lord appears in Bauma Lila, 5,000 years back, he was here. He was in these regions of the planet. Yeah, he was well known, and he was in these regions of the planet. There were people associating with him, and yet they could have easily gotten back with him to Goloka in his eternal pastimes. Instead, they decided to ignore him. Some were openly inimical. Yeah, they had this attitude of being completely inimical to him even when he was here. So this is quite astonishing that even in his presence, all this was going on where they didn't recognize his personality as a supreme person. They didn't. Some recognized him. Some thought he was the super soul. Some thought he was something else. The point is, they could not understand that he was the avatari. He was practically the origin of everybody else. They could not understand the greatness of the personality who was in front of them because it obstructed them in many ways. So when the Lord appears in Bauma Lila, the places of his pastimes and associates, everything is Vaikuntha, just as much as Vrindavan is Vaikuntha. It is the eternal Goloka. Yeah. Now, this Goloka of Vrindavan is covered over by a thin material layer where you see cars and bikes and honking of horns and all kinds of things happening on this material layer, where people identify with the material layer thinking that they're living in Uttar Pradesh in India, and they're basically identifying with the material layer to the extent to which they can identify with Goloka. Goloka's opulence would be revealed as they're here in Braja. The covering itself is quite thin. So the parikrama that we do, we talk about Goloka. So someone has to have realization of Goloka. They have to have had experiences, because with experiences, they would have carried faith in their hearts. And that faith would be imparted when people come for parikrama, because of the fact that they're able to see what is being spoken of, and then they can speak and the others can also experience. Yeah. Otherwise, what happens is people come here and sometimes they complain of this and complain of that, and then they just go away. Yeah. So the point I'm just trying to make here is that even his personal associates who were with him did not recognize him. When the Lord descends, the Vaikuntha planets descend along with him. The Goloka is here. So in that particular scenario, um, 5,000 years back, when there was Leela on this particular planet, Krishna's Leela, there were many who literally were on the platform of the spiritual sky, but they did not recognize him, they did not acknowledge him, they did not serve him. What did they do? They came back to the material sky. So, this is what we mean by falling from the spiritual sky. You don't fall after you cross over in the spiritual sky, but the possibility of falling is very high, because here you are also in touch with matter. It is tatastha. Here, when you're engaging, for example, in the service of the Lord, this is Goloka. Vrindavan is Goloka. But if you identify with matter, it becomes tatastha. You're identifying with material energy. As a consequence, the possibility of falling down is very high. Yeah, it is just that you would lose the opportunity for us to be able to go back. And this is what we mean by saying that one can go to the spiritual sky and yet fall back, because they are in touch with the Lord while he was, you know, having pastimes here. They were born here. They were the Edus. Some of them were born here in different parts of Raja even, but they didn't recognize him. They did not recognize him at all. And since they did not recognize him, they practically came back. Yeah. So that's how you fall from the spiritual sky. So the point which we're just wanting to reiterate is our good fortune. And if we don't forget our good fortune, then we would be guarding it and we would be safeguarding it. So the point is that if you really want to look back on our lives, regardless of when we leave the planet, if there is such a day where we get the opportunity to look back and say that I want to reflect on my life so far, the greatest good fortune is for us to have been a part of this movement. The greatest good fortune is for us to have been holding a bead bag. The greatest good fortune is for us to have been able to have faith in Harinam and to be able to chant and serve Srila Prabhupada's mission, Lord Gauranga's mission, because um, we really didn't have a chance otherwise. Where's the question of credits? Where is the question of having immense credits to be able to associate? Where is the question of being able to stay steady in sadhana? So the point is, regardless of what happens in life, being able to be a part of this movement and being able to have been able to chant and being able to have been able to connect to Srila Prabhupada and to the mission of the Lord Chaitanya, this is our greatest good fortune, because each and every jiva who comes in touch with this movement and who is steady and who is not offensive to the servants of the Lord, they have the ability to practically end their journey. This is a big deal. It's a very, very big deal. We don't recognize it because we don't know better. If you recognize it, then there would be panic state of spending time during the day. There would be a panic state in terms of thinking of other plans, etc. Yeah, we don't recognize it. To the extent to which we recognize it, we are centering ourselves around being able to move forward. The extent to which we recognize it, we don't complain, because Krishna Prema can come with economic problems. Krishna Prema can come with relationship issues. Krishna Prema can be given with health issues. Yeah. All of these can exist, and Krishna Prema can come to us. So the point I'm just trying to make here is, we don't want to focus on what's not happening in life, because the Lord's mercy can be made available even if there are challenges. We should be able to move forward. Now, when I say this, this is an ideal state. This is the best ideal state, because this is exactly how one should process their life. This is Trinadapi Sunichena, Taroriva Saishnuna, Amani Manadena Kirtane Sadahari. Trinadapi Sunichena is to be able to be humble enough to accept the circumstances of life as arranged by the Lord, and then tolerating it is Taroriva Sahishnuna, and then being able to not suffer, because if you suffer, you cannot give respect to others. Amani Manadena, there is no question of being able to respect and then be a well-wisher of others when we are suffering. There can be a lot of problems, but we suffer only when we are far away from Krishna consciousness. The closer we are to Krishna consciousness, we can coexist with all these challenges and yet desire and have very clear visions of what we want in the future. So, our daily business of meditation has to be to sort this mess out so that we desire to chant in a very nice way. We desire to serve, we desire to associate to read Srimad Bhagavatam and come to the Dham so that we can roll in the dust of the Dham. And then these are all things which we should desire very actively while we tolerate the circumstances of life, and then we accept the circumstance of life as being arranged by the Lord Himself. Because what has been given to us is very special. Who is to say whether we ought to be healthy along with Krishna Prema? Who is to say? Maybe Krishna Prema is saying your health situation needs to be a certain way for you to fully appreciate me. Yeah. Maybe Krishna Prema is saying you need to have relationship problems for you to be able to fully appreciate me. Maybe Krishna Prema is saying you need to have economic issues for you to be able to focus and appreciate me fully. Because we see these examples in the Srimad Bhagavatam of economic depravity. We see it in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of Sridhar Kolavecha, who was absolutely poor, but he was completely in prema, where Lord Chaitanya felt appropriate to even drink water from a pot that he would use to take to the fields to relieve himself. Incredible. Yeah. So Lord Chaitanya basically felt it was appropriate that he could even do this. He basically felt that this was a great personality who could even, whom we could connect this way. Now, who is to say that all these examples that we have seen of economic issues, so we see devotees with extraordinary opulence. Yeah. We see devotees with in an impoverished condition. We see devotees with good health, we see devotees with bad health, yeah, and then we see devotees with good and bad relationships. So the point being that who is to say what is required and what is not required for us to be able to appreciate Krishna Prema, for us to be able to welcome Krishna Prema into our lives? Who is to say that this needs to be fixed and that needs to be fixed? Not everyone may be able to accept all of this. Not everyone would be able to completely understand and accept Trinadapi Sunichena Taroriva Saishnuna, Amani Manadena Kirtane Sadahari. Not everyone. But this ideal situation is to be known. We need to know this. This is exactly what Srila Rupa Goswami was reiterating when he said, Anya Bilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, Anukulyena Krishna Anushiranam, Bhakti Uttama. So Uttama Bhakti requires Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. Jnana is to recognize that this world is one of suffering. So one plans to leave the world because this world is full of suffering. And as a consequence, they're cognizant of the fact that the material energy is of great suffering. Yeah. So that is basically a focus on wanting to leave. And then there is a focus on wanting to arrange for things here and arrange for things here in such a way that they're more comfortable. So arranging for economics and then arranging for, marriages, or improvements, etc. And then you're arranging for so many other challenges that we face here. Now, that is karma kanda. So Srila Rupa Goswami is rejecting both because he's saying either of these would be distractions. So focus on Uttama Bhakti and then move forward and keep accepting life. This is the ideal situation of Krishna consciousness. This is the best situation. This is what is recommended by Lord Chaitanya. That's why the Trinadapi Sunichena verse and is the most important verse, because one needs to understand what it is for them to move forward. However, not everybody may be ready. So that's a different story. I'm not going to address that part. What I'm sharing here is I'm sharing what is ideal. as a meditation. I'm sharing what is expected, and what I'm sharing what will work because the mercy has been given. And as a consequence, it's easy for us to think of it this way as well. Yeah. So that is what we wanted to basically convey here, because this chapter is about separation from Krishna. This is the separation of Sri Uddhava, and he's a cousin, but he is from the Dwaraka pastimes. And in the Dwaraka pastimes, in Vaikuntha planets, devotees in Vaikuntha, devotees in Dwaraka, devotees in Ayodhya, they go through ecstasies just as much as we read. However, those ecstasies are, in the sense that the ecstasies are just not limited to Goloka. Prema is not limited to Goloka. In other words, the mellow is very different. Yeah. The rasa and the mellow and the extent to which you could go, the maximum extent that is available in Goloka is not available elsewhere. Lord Hanuman, for example, he would be ecstatic chanting the names of Lord Sri Ram in Dasya Bhakti. So it doesn't mean that Ayodhya doesn't have ecstatic symptoms. Sri Lakshman would be ecstatic in just being able to engage in service in Ayodhya. The servants of Lord Narayana would be ecstatic just being able to serve him wherever he is in different parts of the Vaikuntha planets. The different Vaikuntha planets, the different manifestations of the Lord can be there. So the ecstasy part is seen. So Sri Uddhava was remembering Krishna in Dwaraka, and he was remembering him as the personality of Godhead, as Narayana, and as the Dwarakadish. This is the Vasudev Krishna. This is the Vasudev potency of the Lord. And he was going into ecstasy, and he was going into separation. Devotees in general don't discuss the disappearance pastime of the Lord openly. In other words, that is very painful. What they do is that they start with the Leela of the Lord, and then they go towards the disappearance pastime, or if it is required. It is more contextual. We are not interested in history. We are interested in, the Leela of the Lord, because everything else is everything is eternal. As his disappearance and appearance, all of these are all eternal, in the sense that there really isn't what we would call as a disappearance in the technical sense. But so there is no discussion. It's more Leela, because Leela is eternal. So we will go through the verses, and then we will understand further as to what Srila Sukadev Goswami was talking about when he was remembering Lord Krishna, as seen by the conversation between Sri Vidura and Sri Uddhava. This is chapter 2 of the third canto. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, when the great devotee Uddhava was asked by Vidura to speak on the messages of the dearest Lord Krishna, Uddhava was unable to answer immediately due to excessive anxiety at the remembrance of the Lord. Yeah, so he was remembering his lotus feet, and he was developing ecstasies, because even though he was physically present here on the planet when the conversation took place between him and Sri Vidura, he was already in the eternal Dwaraka, in Dwaraka of the spiritual sky. And this is exactly the symptom of prema, where we talk about devotees who have experiencing prema, who have understood who they are in the in the entourage of the Lord, and they're serving him in Goloka. For them, both their feet are in the spiritual sky. Both their feet are in the spiritual sky. Physically, they are present here, but they're also in the spiritual sky. So he was practically transporting himself, Sri Uddhava, to the spiritual sky, because he was remembering. Because when he remembers, he automatically goes to the spiritual sky. So, verse 2. He was one who, even in his childhood, at the age of 5 years, was so absorbed in the service of Lord Krishna that when he was called by his mother for morning breakfast, he did not wish to have it. So this is complete absorption, for a child. I mean, every child refuses to eat, but refusing to eat because you're engaging in worship and wanting to serve, that's a different story altogether. Uddhava thus served the Lord continually from childhood, and in his old age, that attitude of service never slackened. As soon as he was asked about the message of the Lord, he at once remembered all about him. For a moment, he remained dead silent, and his body did not move. He became absorbed in the nectar of remembering the Lord's lotus feet in devotional ecstasy. And he appeared to be going increasingly deeper into that ecstasy. So this is basically the body being terrestrial, being on this planet, but the soul has already implanted its feet in the spiritual sky, because the soul has an identity. And once that identity is very firmly established, the soul has the ability to transport itself to the spiritual sky. And as a consequence, even while people are, when the devotees are in prema, they are on the planet, they're also not on the planet because they have transported themselves. And it is quite spontaneous. It is not an extraordinary yogic effort. It is spontaneous. That's why Srimad Bhagavatam basically talks about smaranam. Sri Uddhava is basically engaging in smaranam. He's just remembering, and then it is transporting him. Because there are no roots for them. You see, we are rooted in this planet through our conditioning. There is no root for these liberated souls, these extraordinary devotees. They can just transport themselves at the thought of a memory, as of a thought of a pastime. It was so observed by Vidura, that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away tears of separation from his eyes. Thus, Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. So, Sri Vidura could understand that Uddhava was in prema. He had practically assimilated the extensive love for the Lord. And then, how could Sri Vidura understand? Sri Vidura could understand because he was also an experienced devotee. Only if one is in prema would they be able to recognize another. If only one is advanced, they can recognize the other's advancement. Yeah. One who is at a lower level cannot understand the higher level. It is not possible. It's simply a matter of what I would call as experience. It's also a matter of being able to be given that knowledge. So I often see some extensive discussions online, and I know I don't spend time online because we have so many books. I don't read Facebook. I don't do any of those things to gain knowledge, but because we have Srimad Bhagavatam and we have everything else, so why try to gain knowledge elsewhere? Not to say that there's no knowledge there, but I see extensive devotions by extensive discussions by devotees about the eternal nature of Srila Prabhupada. How would we understand the eternal nature of Srila Prabhupada when we are here on this planet and we are conditioned? So those discussions themselves are so inappropriate that when we are conditioned, Master's nature and his eternal, nature and his service in the spiritual sky to Krishna and who he is in the spiritual sky, this is all so out of bound that I find it quite incredulous, and I find that it is such a big waste of time. Yeah. And there are big arguments. This is what Srila Prabhupada is. No, 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 no. He's this. As if people have gone there and have seen him. So the point I'm just trying to make here is that these are all dangerous assumptions to make when one is not advanced. Yeah, these are all very frivolous, because if one is not advanced to recognize who they are, how will they recognize the spiritual master's eternal seva? How is it even possible? Because that information is so confidential. It is so confidential to know who the spiritual master is in his eternal seva to Srimati Radharani and Krishna, that is also a matter of evolving through sadhana, evolving and receiving gifts. That is also a matter of nishtha. It is also a matter of being able to move away from anartha nivritti so that one could receive who they are and they could receive information about their eternal spiritual master. So this is not some cheap information that can be discussed or debated upon. And I get quite appalled when I see these discussions, because I just feel if only the devotees just could focus on improving japa, they would go much, much further than trying to speculate on Srila Prabhupada's eternal nature. So what I'm just wanting to say is that I'm speaking a bit openly because these discussions about these great personalities or eternal servants of the Lord, uh, we should be very careful, and there should be very little speculation, because that basically is not in the realm. For a disciple to receive information about the spiritual master is a revelation. That's a gift, because that connects the disciple at a very, very deep level to the spiritual sky. So this is not some ordinary piece of information that can be discussed. So that's the reason why I find it quite appalling that those discussions are done. But here, what I was just wanting to share is that this is such confidential messages. And the reason why I spoke quite extensively in the beginning of this session about the fact that we are not qualified in any way is because if we don't approach these topics, then these topics can bewilder us. Yeah, so we are getting into ecstasies and so on and so forth. These are all topics that are lofty. One needs to know them because they should know that these things exist. One needs to know that this is available. And you should always listen and know, because that way we would be able to understand things. Yeah. And then one should always know this, but at the same time, one shouldn't take it as what we would call as, granted, if you will, or take it in a very, one shouldn't minimize all of this because this is just very confidential. It was so observed by Vidura that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away tears of separation from his eyes. Thus, Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. The great devotee Uddhava soon came back from the abode of the Lord to the human plane, and wiping his eyes, he awakened his reminiscence of the past and spoke to Vidura in a pleasing mood. Yeah, so this statement is so clear. Sri Uddhava went to the spiritual sky, and then he was back again from the abode of the Lord. This is not a figure of speech. This is not a figure of speech. This is not a speech of, as they were saying, he was remembering and he was lost and he came back. No, this is literal. Sri Uddhava's body was in front of Sri Vidura, but the soul had gone to the spiritual sky and was already in front of the Lord, because internally he was already free, and as a consequence he could go and have darshan of the Lord. He could actually see the pastimes that were occurring in eternal Dwaraka. And then from eternal Dwaraka he comes back into this body. Yeah, this is not a figure of speech. I just want to clarify that this is not some kind of a description of a figure of speech saying, oh, he just remembered and he was so lost, because we use these expressions to describe our activities. We don't want to extend it to Srimad Bhagavatam. Take it literally, because that's what it is. Sri Uddhava said, my dear Vidura, the sun of the world, Lord Kṛṣṇa, has set, and our house has now been swallowed by the great snake of time. What can I say to you about our welfare? So there's despondency in the voice of Sri Uddhava, because he is in separation whilst being here on the planet. But inside his heart, he is in deep association. He is in separation externally, but internally he is in deep association. But the external separation is what allows deep contemplation and reflection and absorption internally. So he is practically saying that Kṛṣṇa has departed, and his Leela is not, it is aprakata. It is not prakata, it is aprakata, it is not, can't be seen. And as a consequence, it is not manifest in front of our eyes as it was, just before a few years back. So as a consequence, the sun is set, because when the sun is setting, it doesn't mean it has gone out of existence. It simply means it is darkness here while it's light elsewhere. So the Lord basically has departed. He has performed his pastimes of, disappearing, is what is being conveyed. The universe with all its planets is most unfortunate. And even more unfortunate are the members of the Yadu dynasty, because they could not identify Lord Hari as the personality of Godhead any more than the fish could identify the moon. Yeah. So because the moon is basically supposed to have been born out of the ocean, and the fish in the ocean can't appreciate the moon. They cannot. Yeah, even if it is reflected and moonlight comes upon the ocean, they can't really appreciate it. Similarly, one is also, I've heard this example. It is an example given by other acharyas saying, the fish in Ganga Devi, in Ganga and Sri Yamuna, they may not recognize that they are actually swimming in Ganga ji and Yamuna ji. They may not. So just as much as that example is given, so here it is said that the Yadu dynasty could not identify that amongst them was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He was the avatari. He was the origin. He is the origin of everybody, and he was there amongst them. The Yadus were all experienced devotees, learned and expert in psychic study. So what does it mean? They were learned and expert in psychic study, so they were quite aware of subtle phenomena. They were not just grossly indulgent. They were aware of subtle phenomena. Over and above this, they were always with the Lord and in all kinds of relaxations And still, they were only able to know him as the one supreme who dwells everywhere. Yeah. This is not all of them. One supreme who dwells everywhere. They could only recognize him as the super soul. They could not recognize him as Narayana. They could not recognize him as Krishna. I mean, the origin of Sri Narayana. Under no circumstances can the words of persons bewildered by the illusory energy of the Lord deviate the intelligence of those who are completely surrendered souls. Yeah. Under no circumstances can the words of persons bewildered by the illusory energy of the Lord deviate the intelligence of those who are completely surrendered souls. Because the intelligence of completely surrendered souls is managed by the Lord. The Lord gives intelligence. He says, if you have to recognize me, I will give you the intelligence. Yeah. We receive intelligence through coming in touch with the Guru. That is that intelligence of realization when we come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam. One could read Srimad Bhagavatam. How much of Srimad Bhagavatam could they understand? Yeah. It's fascinating to see that Srimad Bhagavatam gets misinterpreted and they write what we call as, monist or impersonal purports for the most personal of all literature, which is the summum bonum of all work of Srila Vyasadeva. Even that gets covered over because of their misunderstanding. So you could have Srimad Bhagavatam in your hands and there could be so much bewilderment, so which is what has been observed. It is said that when Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was on the planet, he could not find an authorized copy that easily. That's why we always refer back to the translations of Sridhar Swami. We refer back to the translations of the previous acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and Srila Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas. These are all explanatory of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is what Srila Prabhupada used as the foundation for his purports. He practically drew from his translations and purports, were translations and purports offered by these great personalities. So even Srimad Bhagavatam, when you come in touch with people, can get bewildered because of their nature. What to say of Krishna's presence in a two-armed form as a human being? Lord Sri Krishna, who manifested his eternal form before the vision of all on the earth, performed his disappearance by removing his form from the sight of those who were unable to see him due to not executing required penance. Yeah, they weren't able to pay the price. They took it lightly. We take it lightly too. We take it lightly that we have been given a bead bag. We take it lightly that we have been given mercy. We take it lightly that we have been given Sukriti by Srila Prabhupada, credits which we have no ability to receive otherwise. We have no ability to receive. Some seva that we do for Srila Prabhupada's mission, little seva, and you automatically are blessed with so much credits that even the rishis and the munis, they don't find it easy to accumulate. This is Srila Prabhupada's bounty. He practically sharing his potency. He's sharing the storehouse of credits and his storehouse of mercy so that we are able to somehow or the other move forward. So this is basically how it's manifesting for us. So here in this verse, it said, Lord Sri Krishna, who manifested his eternal form before the vision of all on the earth, performed his disappearance by removing his form from the sight of those who are unable to see him due to not executing required penance. Due to not executing required penance. Tapa, we read about it in the second canto. What did Sri Brahma do? He had to engage in tapaha. He had to engage in penance. What was the penance? 1,000 years of meditating on the mantra that was received by him. So he practically received a mantra from Lord Narayan. He meditated on the mantra, chanted the mantra for 1,000 years, and he could have visions of Lord Narayan. The Lord appeared in the mortal world by his internal potency, Yogamaya. He came in his eternal form, which is just suitable for his pastimes. These pastimes are wonderful for everyone, even for those proud of their own opulence, including the Lord himself in his form as the Lord of Vaikuntha. This is basically fascinating. So this is what it is. The Lord of Vaikuntha is Mahavishnu. The Lord of Vaikuntha is Lord Narayan. That was Sri Advaita Acharya Prabhu. Advaita Acharya was fascinated and he basically wanted Gaur Leela to begin. As a consequence, he was worshipping Lord Narasimha to remove all obstacles so that Gaur Leela could descend, because Lord Narasimhadev is so special that he appears very specifically to remove the torment and the obstacles faced by the chanters of Harinam. So Lord Narasimhadev for us is extraordinarily what I would call as contextual and connected to us. Sometimes devotees ask me, why, why chant Narasimhadev's Lord Narasimha's mantra? That is because this is Krishna who was prayed to remove the obstacles of one who is chanting Harinam. This is the same Krishna in this Rupa who was prayed to by Sri Advaita Acharya so that Gaur Leela could begin. He practically removed all the obstacles. So he removed all the obstacles for the descent of the Lord, and then he descended. So this is basically what we would call as an extraordinary connection between Lord Narasimhadev and and Krishna and Harinam. If you want to understand Lord Narasimha's context within Gaur Leela, you should read the 5 prayers written by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. You can Google 5 prayers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And this is a part of his description of Navadvip in the Navadvip Taranga. And he basically has described and he has written 5 verses glorifying Lord Narasimhadev, requesting Lord Narasimhadev to remove the obstacles faced by him so that he could worship the divine couple in Mayapur, in Navadvip and Mayapur. So this is basically how the context is. So what is fascinating is Srimad Bhagavatam says here very clearly, and then we also saw it happen with Sri Advaita Acharya, that even the Lord of Vaikuntha, or one, even he finds the pastimes of Brajendra Nandan, Krishna, extraordinary. Even he finds the pastimes of the Lord so extraordinary. So quite an amazing thing. Quite amazing. We can't even imagine how it is. All the demigods from the upper, lower, and middle universary planetary systems assembled at the altar of the Rajasuya sacrifice performed by Maharaj Yudhishthira. After seeing the beautiful bodily features of Lord Krishna, they all contemplated that he was the ultimate dexterous creation of Brahma, the creator of human beings. Yes, so the demigods could see that the Lakshana, the bodily attributes of the Lord when he appeared at the Rajasuya sacrifice. He was much, much older at that time, but he is Nava Yavana, even though he is Purana Purusha. He is the oldest, but he is also the most youthful. And the body Lakshana, which is the appearance of the Lord, and the features of the Lord were so extraordinary that the demigod could see that this particular personality who is sitting here is quite extraordinary. But for them, they were quite limited in the knowledge of who he is. And as a consequence, not everybody knew who he was, but they could see that he was someone very special. So this information of who he is was even hidden during Krishna's Leela 5,000 years back. Not everybody could fully understand. Sometimes they could understand, and sometimes they would forget. That's the problem. The damsels of Braja, after pastimes of laughter, humor, and exchanges of glances, were anguished when Krishna left them. They used to follow him with their eyes, and thus they sat down with stunned intelligence and could not finish their household duties. Yeah. So basically, this is a description of the Rajagopis who felt intense separation from Krishna when he left. But what is the separation of the Rajagopis? Because Krishna is eternal, when he is present, he is in front of them, they can see him. When he is absent, he enters into their heart. So the proximity is far, far greater when he is absent. So in that sense, his presence is felt in their hearts in a far more profound way in his absence. So this is extolled by our acharyas as well. The personality of Godhead, the all-compassionate controller of both the spiritual and material creations, is unborn. But when there is friction between his peaceful devotees and persons who are in the material modes of nature, he takes birth just like fire, accompanied by the Mahat Tattva. So now this is a description given by Sri Uddhava. You could notice very clearly that he is not talking about or elaborating on the Vraja pastimes. He is talking more about Krishna's opulence because that was his experience. Here he is talking about the fact that when the Lord wants to protect his devotees, when he wants to interact with his devotees, then he practically comes down. Yeah, he comes and he appears, and then he appears with all the controllers of the Mahatattva, because the Lord controls everything. We saw it in the previous canto, in the second canto, very specifically the Chatushloki. The Lord says, I'm in the beginning, I'm in the middle, I'm in the end. He also says that if there is any activity that is conducted, then that particular activity, if it is not connected to me, then that is considered that to be in the mode of ignorance. It is going to be destroyed. And then he also speaks about the fact that he could be involved in all these activities and yet he is not involved, describing his presence and his quality of being completely unaffected by the material nature. He is aloof. He is involved, but he is not involved. And he is also giving that particular qualification to us as devotees, so we have the ability to approach him. And then finally, we also read in the fourth verse that you should know all of this for you to understand him. So in that context, when he enters and when he comes into the planet, at that point, he comes with all his opulences, all his connections, all his potencies. So he comes as Vasudeva, Shankarshana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna. He comes, from the origin. He comes with everybody, and as a consequence, these are the Purushas. He comes with all of them, and as a context, he basically manages the distress of the devotees and grants them relief. When I think of Lord Krishna, how he was born in the prison house of Vasudeva, although he is unborn, how he went away from his father's protection to Vraja, lived there incognito out of fear of the enemy, and how, although unlimitedly powerful, he fled from Mathura in fear. All these bewildering incidents give me distress. So Sri Uddhava is feeling great distress because these are all very bewildering. Yeah, because he is basically, as we said, he is a Brahaspati Shishya. Because he is a Brahaspati Shishya, the intellect is how he processes things. Of course, there are ecstasies, there's an acceptance of the Lord, and he is serving him in Vaikuntha. But the point is that there's still distress because these are all situations which only the devotees will relish. Sri Uddhava is basically getting distressed as well. Yeah, he fled from Mathura in fear, and he went away from his father's protection to Vraja, as if someone needs to give Krishna protection. But then he allowed all of this to happen. When Vasudeva he was carrying Krishna and he was coming on the night of Janmashtami to Vrindavan, to Vraja, and he was crossing Sri Yamuna, he accidentally, rather not accidentally, Krishna practically jumped out of his hand. He was a newborn. And he caused great distress to Sri Vasudeva because he couldn't find him for a few seconds. The baby fell into the raging water. But he found him eventually and he brought him back. So these are all situations where there's great distress experienced by his devotees, while he basically wants them to think about him in a very deep way. So he jumps in and then he comes out again. So this is very, very very wonderful. Then he basically fled from Mathura. He established Dwaraka, and this is basically another example where it was a very human-like fleeing from the enemy's circumstance. Then one wonders, how is it possible? He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah. And then going to Braja in the middle of the night. Lord Krishna begged pardon from his parents for their Krishna and Balaram's inability to serve their feet due to being away from home because of great fear of Kamsa. He said, "Oh mother, oh father, please excuse us for this inability. All this behavior of the Lord gives me pain at heart." Because for Sri Uddhava, he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the servant who has accepted the master in that particular mood feels great pain when the master humbles himself. You see? So it is said that Krishna will not take offense, but it doesn't mean the servants will keep quiet. They will not, because they can't tolerate any offenses towards them. They will not be able to tolerate. So, in that sense, when he saw the Lord humbling himself, knowing who he is, because of all the blessings which Sri Uddhava had, he couldn't tolerate that particular circumstance. Who, after smelling the dust of his lotus feet even once, could ever forget it? Who, after smelling the dust of his lotus feet even once, could ever forget it? Simply by expanding the leaves of his eyebrows, Krishna has given the death blow to those who are burdening the earth. You have personally seen how the king of Chedi, Sishupal, achieved success in yoga practice, although he hated Lord Krishna. Even the actual yogis aspire after such success with great interest in the performance of the various practices. Who can tolerate separation from him? Yeah. This Shishupal was cursing him, and he had great anger, just as much as Kamsa and the other demons. This is called pratikula remembrance. You're remembering, but then it is pratikul. It is not favorable. It's unfavorable remembrance of the Lord. So when Srila Rupa Goswami says, Anukulyena Kṛṣṇa Anushilanam, it has got to be favorable. Now, we don't want to think that our business is to not be Shishupal. No. Our business has nothing to do with pratikul. Our business has everything to do with anukul. But even in anukul, favorable thinking of the Lord, our business is to follow in the footsteps of Srimati Radharani. This is our business. When we say anukulyena Kṛṣṇa Anushilanam, how do we follow and basically serve the Lord? Anukulyena Kṛṣṇa Anushilanam. It has to be done remembering Srimati Radharani. It has to be done remembering Lord Gauranga. For us, remember Lord Gauranga and his pastimes and spread the mission. And that would practically make us anukula. That is what we we need to do. Certainly, others who were fighters on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were purified by the onslaught of Arjuna's arrows. And while seeing the lotus-like face of Krishna so pleasing to their eyes, they achieved the abode of the Lord. Lord Sri Krishna is the Lord of all kinds of trees and is independently supreme by achievement of all kinds of fortune. He is worshipped by the eternal maintainers of the creation, who offer him the paraphernalia of worship by touching the millions of helmets to his feet. So, what does he talk about? Trees, three qualities of material nature. Yeah. So he is the Lord of the three qualities of material nature. He is above the three qualities of material nature. He is transcendental, the Lord of the threes. He is the origin of the three Purushas, Karunodakashayi, Garbhodakashayi, Shirodakashayi. Yeah. So this is the description that is being given here of the Lord of all threes. Therefore, Vidura, does it not pain us, his servitors, when we remember that he used to stand before King Ugrasena, who was sitting on the royal throne, and used to submit explanations before him, saying, "O my Lord, please let it be known to you." Alas, how shall I take shelter of one more merciful than he who granted the position of mother to a she-demon, Putana, although she was unfaithful and she prepared deadly poison to be sucked from her breast? Quite fascinating. I consider the demons who are inimical towards the Lord to be more than the devotees, because while fighting with the Lord, absorbed in the thoughts of enmity, they are able to see the Lord carried on the shoulder of Garuda, the son of Takshaya, and carrying the wheel weapon in his hand. So the vision of Krishna sitting on Garuda with, the forearm form, carrying Sudarshana, and with the conch and the club, etc., and the lotus, that vision is seen by the demons because they practically go to battle with him. So Shri Uddhava is saying they are very fortunate. They are more fortunate. But all of these remembrances of Shri Uddhava belong to Krishna's opulence and Aishwarya of Dwaraka and Vaikuntha. Yeah. For him, it would have been very difficult to understand the mood of the gopis and the Mother Yashoda and Nanda Baba when they would practically don't even consider that their son had anything to do with being Lord Narayan. They thought he was blessed by Narayan in certain ways, but they would never ever accept him as the supreme person because that interferes with Shuddha Bhakti. Their Shuddha Bhakti is the sweetness, it's unadulterated, unsullied sweetness in connection with Krishna, where the sweetness covers all his, all kinds of opulences. There are opulences, but they're all covered over by the sweetness. But Sri Uddhava's remembrances are definitely in the Vaikuntha planets. The personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, being prayed to by Lord Brahma to bring welfare to the earth, was begotten by Vasudeva in the womb of his wife Devaki in the prison of the king of Bhoja. Thereafter, his father, being afraid of King Kamsa, brought him to the cow pastures of Maharaj Nanda, and there he lived for 11 years like a covered flame with his elder brother Baladeva. In his childhood, the Almighty Lord was surrounded by cowherd boys and calves, and thus he traveled on the shore of the Yamuna river through gardens densely covered with trees and filled with vibrations of chirping birds. These are descriptions of Vrindavan. When the Lord displayed his activities just suitable for childhood, he was visible only to the residents of Vrindavana. Sometimes he would cry and sometimes laugh, just like a child, and while so doing, he would appear like a lion cub. This is a description that is found in many, many scriptures of him being like a lion cub. This is also found in the songs written by the Sri Vaishnava Acharyas, where they describe him to be a lion cub. They call him Mother Yashoda's son, but as a lion cub. While herding the very beautiful bulls, the Lord, who was the reservoir of all opulence and fortune, used to blow his flute, and thus he enlivened his faithful followers, the cowherd boys. The great wizards who were able to assume any form were engaged by the king of Bhoja, Kamsa, to kill Krishna. But in the course of his pastimes, the Lord killed them as easily as a child breaks dolls. The inhabitants of Vrindavan were perplexed by great difficulties because a certain portion of the Yamuna was poisoned by the chief of the reptiles, Kaliya. The Lord chastised the snake king within the water and drove him away after coming out of the river. He caused the cows to drink the water to prove that the water was again in its natural state. The Supreme Lord Krishna desired to utilize the opulent financial strength of Maharaj Nanda for worship of the cows, and also he wanted to give a lesson to Indra, the king of heaven. Thus, he advised his father to perform the worship of Go, or the pasturing land, and the cows with the help of learned brahmanas. So, Go Seva was the first thing that he gave to Nanda Maharaj. It's the best seva one could do. O sober Vidura, King Indra, his honor having been insulted, poured water incessantly on Vrindavana, and thus the inhabitants of Vraja, the land of cows, were greatly distressed. But the compassionate Lord Krishna saved them from danger with his pastime umbrella, the Govardhan Hill. Yeah. In the third season of the year, the Lord enjoyed as the central beauty of the assembly of women by attracting them with his pleasing songs in an autumn night brightened by moonshine. He's referring to the Rasalila. Yeah. So this is the last verse. So I guess we have concluded the second chapter. If there are any questions, we could take a few questions now.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for a very nice class. Very nice. Very sweet. This is about Krishna's pastimes. This chapter is very sweet.
Yes.
My question was about the very beginning when you started in the class. You spoke about when we are in the mode of goodness, we are aware of the Paramatma giving us instructions. Often I get a bit confused. Sometimes it could even be the mind that's playing. How do we distinguish it's the Paramatma that is giving instructions or it's the mind playing up?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. So basically, the idea is to first position ourselves in the mode of goodness. You should go back to the beginning of the second canto, where we spoke of the fact that Lord Brahma was situated in Satyaloka, and as a consequence, he had access to receive instructions from the Lord because he was in the proximity of the spiritual sky. So that's the first step. And then the next step, of course, would be that the engagement of the sadhana, which is being given, which is Lord Brahma's sadhana was chanting, our sadhana is also chanting. And whenever we have realizations, we should also have a certain degree of what I would call as comparison to consistency with scriptural conclusions. So, is it consistent with scriptural conclusion or not? That is also something which we should keep in mind. So, sometimes you may receive a realization, but you may not find a verse that you can qualify as being connected to the realization, or you may not be able to determine if that realization is connected to any specific verse. My advice would be write it down and then continue your sadhana and continue your what I would call as practices. And as a consequence, some point that will also be revealed. The most important point I was trying to establish was that one needs to be in the mode of goodness because that is required. That's a prerequisite. It is the platform. And the second point was you need to do what Lord Brahma did, which is tapaha, which is to do our daily practice. That's our protection. Everything else gets arranged because Krishna promises that he will basically give us intelligence. The intelligence would come as long as we are able to engage in the activities as prescribed.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was really very insightful. Sometimes you get these flashes which are on a day-to-day life, will not necessarily be coherent. Like something simple as parking a car, or even then you get these, and then you're not sure, and then you think, I wish I'd listened to it, and then when you go there, you think, oh, that kind of thing.
Sure, I understand. So what I'm saying is, for activities such as that, we are getting intelligence. You see, we have the ability to access intelligence. We are getting intelligence. So we can apply what we already see from the environment and also basically do our best in those circumstances if we receive those things. So I agree. I understand your point. You sometimes feel that you have received something, but you're not able to act upon it because you haven't really crystallized it and you haven't been able to put things in motion. I'm
Yeah.
saying that basically, we have to endeavor. That's why we have to be able to listen. We have to endeavor. Yeah, we have to endeavor but what I'm saying is, we don't need to endeavor to receive instructions from the super soul particularly. We need to endeavor to be in the mode of goodness, because that is measurable, that you can do. You can endeavor to do the sadhana nicely, that is also measurable, that can be done. And then we can also follow scriptural injunctions on how to behave, etc. When we do all of this, then we also have the ability of a greater level of freedom, so that whatever is received in the heart can also be implemented. Does it make sense? It is a matter of doing what we can, and it should be very measurable. So we don't want to focus on, am I able to hear things? Yeah, we don't want to do that. But what we want to do is to be able to do what is expected by the acharyas. So as a consequence, we are automatically protected. We receive what is supposed to be received as well.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure. Any other question?
Hare Guru.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I had a question in relationship to Uddhav's relationship with Krishna, not necessarily related to this chapter.
Sure.
Yeah, so we hear that read that Uddhav's relationship with Krishna, which, as you mentioned, is with Vasudeva Krishna, is in a mood of intimate friendship, and there are tinges of servitude in there as well.
Yes.
And then you find in Vrajalila that there are suckers out of the 4 different types of cowherd boys. The suckers, they are friends, and they have servitude within there as well. They're younger than Krishna, and they serve him. So when Krishna, it's a bit of a technical thing. So when Uddhav went to Vrindavan and he sent the message of Krishna to the gopis, then when we read that, he's desiring to become like a blade of grass so that he can be stepped on by the gopis and whatnot. And you hear that, and also from my understanding, there are some compatible aspects, some aspects of rasa that are compatible with one another, and some that are not. And it seems as though this manifestation of rasa that Uddhav is feeling when he goes to Vrindavan after meeting gopis, it seems like is incompatible with his current relationship as a friend of Krishna with servitude. Obviously, of course, servitude is always emphasized over neutrality. So I'm just wondering, how is this possible? Like, how does he desire to become a blade of grass?
Yeah. See, if the first point is servitude is practically fundamental, it is contained within all the rasas. Yeah. Because servitude in Sakya, servitude in Dasya, servitude in Vatsalya, servitude in Madhurya, all of these contain servitude. There's no doubt. However, what is it that is going to give the greatest pleasure to the Lord? In the case of the cowherd boys, there is servitude because they're younger to Krishna. However, there's Vishramba as well, which means they consider themselves to be the same as him. They don't think of themselves as being inferior. So the idea is that when you start thinking of yourself as being inferior because someone is superior to you, that introduces an element of what we would call as a disturbance. It is more of a disturbance. You can't really be a friend if you think someone is superior to you, because there's going to be some formality that's going to be introduced. And as a consequence, they don't really consider him as superior. They consider him as an equal, even though they're younger, but their mood of service is the way they interact with him is to serve him in certain ways. But in their minds, they don't really think of him as superior. That's the very important distinction. Now, because that's how it works. Otherwise, it would just spoil the whole concept of Sakyaras. If servitude comes and dominates, then the Vishramba, which is the equality, which is the main tone of Sakyaras, would be dominated by servitude. So that's the point I was just wanting to make. So the point is that when Sri Uddhava appears in Braja, he is a Brahaspati Shishya, and as a consequence, his processing of events is very shastric, and his processing, and it is all based on Gyan. So he has practically experienced the Lord in his opulence. He has experienced him as Dwarkadish. He has seen him in ways in which he's basically Narayan for him. Yeah. So he's non-different from Narayan. He's seeing him that way. Vasudev Krishna is non-different from Narayan, which is the truth in reality as well. But the point is that when it comes to Vraja, he gets quite bewildered because of the intensity of pure love that is exhibited by the Vrajavasis, where they have nothing to do with Krishna as the Supreme Lord. They're actually pining in separation from him as the individual, as Krishna, the cowherd boy, Krishna, the partner in Madhuri Ras, Krishna, the son in Vatsalya. They're really, really crestfallen because they're in deep separation. So he sees that and realizes as basically a gift by the Supreme Lord. Krishna sends Sri Uddhava to Vraja to give him the gift of association so that he could appreciate Vraja Bhakti. And when he appreciates Vraja Bhakti, because Krishna knew that if once Uddhava sees Vraja Bhakti, he would know what it is to be a Vraja Bhakta. So he basically sends him out to give him that particular experience and that samskara of being a Vraja Bhakta so that he could basically aspire for it. Shri Uddhava wanting to be a blade of grass is out of his humility of understanding what is Vraja. Yeah. We get astonished because sometimes devotees aspire for this and aspire for that. But here's someone who basically was a personal associate of the Lord, who has entered into Vraja, who has seen Srimati Radharani, who has seen the associates, he's seen all the gopis and Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Maya, and he practically realizes the opulence of Vraja, the sweetness of Vraja is practically covering over. So he aspires to be a blade of grass, and this is out of his humility. Krishna basically wants to gift him Vraja Bhakti. As a consequence, he sends him over. So that's the understanding. I'm not sure if it completely addressed your question, because your statements were, you kind of made many statements, but I don't know if I addressed your question, but if not, you can just maybe specify what, anything which I still need to address.
Overall, no, yes, that's fine. So it was just like confusing because, but as you mentioned, it's because of his humility that he desires to be a blade of grass.
Exactly. When you read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's poems, when you read the poems of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, and you see that they all say, I'm so fallen. The problem is that when we say we are fallen, we don't mean it. There's no realization. But when they write that they are fallen, they literally feel that way. And they act upon it as well. Sri Raghunath Das Goswami used to pay obeisances when he could barely get up after paying dandavats. He used to practically pay obeisances to everyone who comes there when he was in his bhajan kutir. Then he could barely get up. Even when he prostrated himself, he could barely, sit up after paying obeisances. But he still used to make every attempt to pay obeisances to the Vaishnavas. So our difficulty is in understanding the statements of the acharyas, putting ourselves into their shoes, which is a great, great folly, because in many ways we are like frogs in the well. We are very limited in our understanding of what they meant. So the first thing that we should do when we read scripture, especially the acharyas' writings where they write about their humility, Dainya. Dainya is humility. There's a whole section in Sharanagati about humility, is to first offer prayers to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and to Narottam Das Thakur, requesting them somehow or the other to grant us intelligence so that we could understand what they intended when they wrote. Otherwise, we will not be able to understand because we always process things based on who we are. Does it make sense? So it's always very difficult to comprehend these lofty ideals. So when Sri Uddhava says, I want to be a blade of grass, then we take it literally. Did he become a blade of grass? But in reality, that was his humility, because he looked at the Vrajavasis and he understood that this is just phenomenal. I'm nowhere. Please, can I have a little space here in Vraja as a blade of grass? That's the intent.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Prabhu. The other thing was, just following on from what you said. So does Uddhav remain as a servant in relation to Vasudeva Krishna, or after me, as you mentioned, because Krishna sent him there to get association of the Vrajvasis. So after association, does he actually become a Vrajvasi, or does he remain a servant of Vasudeva Krishna?
Well, I guess he is engaging in penance. That is our understanding. And he is in Govardhan to practically transform himself. He's serving Krishna in Govardhan Leela. So in Govardhan.
Okay.
Yeah. So one who has received such a profound experience, they basically wouldn't want to give up the treasure. So they want to just continue their seva. In that sense, they would want to continue their attempt to engage in Vraja Seva. That's the point.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Not at all.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Forgive me if I ask some stupid question, Prabhuji. Now we were talking about Jews not recognizing Krishna as a supreme Lord, and so I have a doubt. Is not on some topic you were mentioning. So they came from Vaikunta to do this Leela. So after this Leela, did everyone went back to Vaikunta, or some of them stayed here because they didn't see Krishna as a god, or they didn't respect Krishna?
Right. Well, see, not all of them came from Sri Vaikunta. Basically, some of them were qualified to be a part of his entourage because of the previous austerities. But even though they were qualified and they were born around him and in that region, they still couldn't accept him and kind of go forward. As a consequence, they had to again come back here. So they did not really, all of them did not come from Sri Vaikunta. There were potencies of the Lord who descended, and those potencies basically went back with him. So, for example, you have his son Shripadyumna, then his grandson Aniruddha, then Lord Balaram himself, Sankarshana. These are all his expansions, the quadruple expansions. And then there were other demigods who practically took birth in the Yadus. So not all of them went back. Not all of them came from Sri Vaikunta. There were those who came, and then some of them became qualified, and some of them had to kind of start again in certain ways in trying to develop a deeper understanding.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Sure. Any other comment or question?
Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
How come, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So how come family also don't go back, Prabhuji, Krishna's own family, like you were mentioning? Why do they have to start again?
That's because it's not the question of family. It is a matter of them being able to recognize his presence and serve him in that particular capacity. So Krishna says this in 4.9 of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Janma karma chame divyam. So that particular aspect of understanding his transcendental activities, his birth, and his activities as being completely transcendental. If that doesn't happen, then the families don't go back either, in the sense that it doesn't mean that family members have anything more to do. So if your question is that are they automatically qualified, the answer is no. When they need to basically position themselves, and they need to receive, the ability to understand him. Say the entire Kaurava army, the Duryodhana and Kauravas, not one of them could recognize him. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can be around him, but then recognizing him, then they were all cousins. They could not even understand that he was the supreme person. They in fact went to war with him. Some abused him, some shouted at him, some were basically treated him as some kind of a magician. There are so many instances of insults that were poured upon the Lord. So there is no guarantee that the family basically is going to go back simply because they are in the proximity, they're born in the, connected families, etc. So there is no such thing. So that's basically the fact.
Okay, Prabhuji, thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. All right, I can take one last question if anybody has any, then we could move on to next week. Oh, I think there are some questions on chat. I'm sorry. How can we gauge our sincerity? How do you gauge your sincerity? Well, basically, what is sincere has to be a matter of understanding what is the objective. Why are we doing what we are doing? So this evaluation has to come from Shastra. It has to come from the association of devotees, where we find out that why am I doing what am I doing? Am I in the Sangha of devotees for name? Am I in the Sangha of devotees for fame? Am I in the Sangha of devotees for, some other purpose? What am I really doing? So sincerity is about being internally and externally the same. So what are my internal desires and what are my external actions? The opposite of sincerity is duplicity, where one may act externally as if they are engaging in certain things, but internally they have other reasons to do it. Yeah, so that's the difference. So how do you gauge it? You want to gauge and ensure your sincerity by ensuring that what is going on inside is also what is going on outside. That's how we gauge it. All right, so we'll end today's session and we'll meet again in the following session, following week, and we'll continue our discussion of the third canto. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Dandavad.
Haribo. Dandavat.
Haribo.